order the regularly scheduled Board of Finance meeting on August 13th, 2018, and begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, about some of us.
All right. Have a Tracy? Can I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved. Second?
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right. So everybody had a chance to review the minutes from the regular meeting on July 9th. Anybody have comments, questions?
I move that we accept the minutes as written.
Second, anywhere?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
One of our opportunities for guests and audience comments. We didn't have anything to report on from the last meeting, so question or comment?
I have a couple comments and some questions.
Okay.
Good. I read the last issue of Haddam News, and read about the crisis that we face relative to the oak trees and ash trees and so forth, and the impending financial consequences of that. I think Emmett told me about this some time ago, and we initially thought it'd be $500,000 to $1 million, and I recently read that it would be $1 million to $4 million. That's what it said in the paper, so they got that information from someplace. I don't know where it came from. So I guess, and then when I looked at your agenda, online I saw that you were looking at increasing revenue. So I'm going to be saying some things that you'll probably find a bit unkind, but please don't take them personally, okay? Because it's not personal, it's just business. I gave you a roadmap to save a whole bunch of money relative to the transfer station quite some time ago. And I know that you included in your budget the ability to go and get a truck. I've heard through the grapevine that you've had some negotiating difficulties with your refusal to drive it. I don't know whether that's true because it was hearsay. However, if that is true, I wish you the best. I would make a suggestion that the way you deal with that is I believe that you have a right to define what the job responsibilities of the various people that work for you, whether they be union or non-union. You may want to consider, if that in fact is the case, to provide the individuals with training to go and do that, define the job responsibilities as having to drive a truck, provide them with the training needed to do that if they're not qualified to do that, give them a small increment because they now have additional capabilities and so forth, which would seem fair to me. And should you not have the people to draw from to do that, then you simply do what you need to do to get the people that can do that and then access the people that are unable to do that. That would be what my question is. That would be something that I think, a way of handling it anyway. The second part has to do with the transfer station and talk a bit about your commingling of funds between the Board of Education and the town. I was disappointed that not a whole lot's been done. I went to a couple of selectmen meetings, and after your tragedy, I decided that I would not come any longer because I didn't think that was ethically correct. In the roadmap that I gave you, I pointed out a number of areas. And when I saw this increasing revenue, I realized there were some items on that roadmap that provided increased revenue. When I attended the selectmen's meetings in the past, the first time I was told that there were ordinances that prevented you from going back doing what I had suggested to do, being eliminating carters from the transfer station. And I feel terrible because I should have, as my duties as the chairman of that committee, I should have read those ordinances, which I did not. So the second time I came back and I had read those. And inside the ordinances, it clearly states that the selectmen, being the three selectmen, the first selectman and the two other selectmen, had the capability to define the rules and regulations of the transfer station, and also they had the capability to define what the rates would be, rules would be, the fees would be for getting rid of trash. So it was very clear to me that within that, without having to address the bad part of a new type of system that would create bags that people would buy, but outside that, you would be able to save about $86,000. I handed you all pieces of paper that define those costs and all that. I'd be happy to give it to you again, should you misplace it. So under those things, you'd be able to create $86,000 worth of revenue through savings by simply telling your carters that you currently have coming in that they're still welcome to come in, provided they pay the fees, our cost. Because also in the ordinance document, it defines what the fee should be. The fee says the fee should be what we have to pay to get rid of the garbage that they bring to us. And we know what those fees are. We know what the tipping fees are, which are $60 to $70 per ton. We know what the transportation costs are, which are about $10 per ton. And then to that, you should also add some overhead that would be associated with the running of the dump. You should be able to do that simply by a vote in the selectmen that they would do that. You'd have to post it, it says there that you have to post it in the paper, and you can save almost $100,000 for a budget that's going to be very difficult in the future to manage, should these costs that you have go on. The other area that I mentioned was the cost of bulky waste. I used to live in another area where we had a very similar transfer station. We called it a dump. And if you wanted to go and bring demolition materials or large bulky items, you would have to go over a weighing station. You had no choice. If you wished to cheat on it because you just had a little bit, then you would take it and put it in the recycling bin, similar to what people do now, maybe a small piece of wood or whatever, they might do that. I'm sure that that's what happens now. I examined the use of bulky waste area and found out that 79% of all bulky waste was not being paid for by anyone. That's not only citizens, it's also business and all that type of thing. Also found that you had a current system of stickers that you had on your cars. I know that Eminence tried to encourage the workers there to put them on. However, because I know when I went there a lot of times, I never saw stickers on very many cars, perhaps maybe 20 or 30. So I suggested also that you create some type of enforcement mechanism, that you have stickers that are based upon the license plate of a car so that you can limit cars so that they can't come in from Colchester and East Hampton and so forth. So those are the issues and in that area, there was probably somewhere between $50,000 and $70,000 that could be gained without changing any rules, just having people pay for what they're supposed to pay for. I can assure you, in the last environment, there was a guy that would just look at your car and say, what do you have? If it was something that was not chargeable, you didn't go in for free. If it was something you had to pay for, then it's $70,000. The way I count, 90,000 and 70,000 is 160 grand, okay? Quite frankly, as a citizen, I took the time of going and speaking to the chief executive officer of a large company that collects garbage in this area. And I asked him about What impact would it have on your business if you didn't have to pay any tipping fees? He laughed. I'd make a fortune. I examined and took note of what were the charges that were being made by the companies that pick up trash in East Haddam. And the rate was $81 per quarter. Doesn't sound like an unreasonable one. And then I called up another company. Actually, for this one, I called up Blum. They pick up my son's trash, and they charge $78. So I complained. I made it sound like I was a customer. I said, no, $87, excuse me. And then I went and I complained. That's an awful lot. Well, we can do it for 78. He says, is it just you and your wife? I said, yeah, that's it. He goes, well, we'll give you 2 smaller cans for 65 gallons instead of 95 gallons. And then it would be $78 less than what the residents here currently pay. From my perspective, what this town is currently doing is a direct subsidy to private businesses. I find it appalling. And it might be that you check with your Attorney General. I think you'll find that there's laws in the state which deals with this type of thing, direct subsidies. Also, as someone that doesn't use aid, I mentioned in here that about 25 to 30% of the people use the private cars, and the other 70 to 75% don't. I don't understand why I have to subsidize other people. Why does the majority have to subsidize the minority? It doesn't seem fair to me. It doesn't seem democratic to me. Okay? I'm coming to you as the Finance Committee because there's revenues here involved, okay? And I look at those 2 very specific things as being probably $150,000 to $160,000, and I believe that you should have discussion with your selectmen about, perhaps making a change in that area. The next area I think that you need to look at is probably be more addressed to you. One thing I didn't know is I understand that since you moved in here, and again, I'm a new resident, so I'll take the chance of asking a question that I probably should know the answer to, but you decided to put the Board of Education into this building. I know that in the past they were in a rented building, I believe, and they paid rent. How much rent are they paying us?
There is no rent.
I thought that's what you would say. I think that it's time for you to consider the separation of the town and the school education budget. Okay, you cannot go and tell the citizens of your town that the cost of education, the cost of the Board of Education is one number when town financing is subsidizing their budget. It just isn't right. I, as a taxpayer, would like to pay for a town budget, and I'd like to pay for a school budget, and I'd like to know what that school budget is, not a number that's artificially lowered by expenses that have been commingled with the town. If they were to go out and buy a copier, could they go to Best Buy and get a copier for free? Just like they're getting rent for free? They have use of other town facilities. And I just find it to be very difficult for me to understand why and what the logic would be to do it. So there's other areas. I mean, I know you have a shared resource area or shared expense area, which sometimes makes sense and sometimes doesn't. I would suggest that you have a Board of Ed meter, and Board of Ed person, and a finance person, and look at those expenses and see what they are and find out. Like there's some areas where it certainly makes sense. I know you have a really good IT bill guy in the building who takes care of both things. Well, are you apportioning those expenses correctly, or is it just 50-50? I suspect the Board of Ed probably uses the bulk of those, although I could be wrong. So those are the areas that I'm concerned about. I don't really have any more comments to make. Again, none of this was personal. It's simply things that I think you need to take a careful look at. I gave you a roadmap that would save you a lot of money. Okay, I know that there's been efforts to try to implement this, but I know that there's sometimes roadblocks. And all I'm saying to you, in those two big areas, there are no roadblocks. There is absolutely no roadblock to forcing people to get their bulky waste measured. Also, it should be an audited thing. Cynthia should be involved with it. They should know exactly how much is going in there and how much we're getting paid for it. To tell me that 80% of the bulky waste in there is not getting measured and getting put in there for free is outrageous. I'm done.
Thank you. Todd?
Mr. Chairman, Bob made a lot of comments, and I can't take notes that fast.
I can.
You want to ask a question?
Here's what this is me talking, I'm sure the rest of the board feels, but you made a lot of good comments, asked a lot of good questions. And it'd be nice, maybe Deb's got them already, but a list of the questions he asked, and a list of the points he made. And you think you got all that, Deb? You got all those questions? Very good, and those will be in the minutes? Thank you. What you're telling me that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. You're telling us there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that should be taken advantage of. And I agree with you. And a lot of people in town agree with you, because I go to the transfer station on Saturdays and I get an airfall. And polite, people are polite, but I'm obviously very concerned and well upset. So, as I suggested at the Board of Selectmen meeting, that I know it's a big job for a lot of people to do, so that's why we should form a committee with a charge of execution, of doing what you recommended. If we find along the way it's not quite as good as we first thought, then there is a way. But there's a lot of obvious stuff. I don't see, I agree with you, I don't see why it hasn't been done. I know there's other considerations, and the first selectman pointed out at the Board of Selectmen meetings, but the public in town wants to see something done. And something needs to be done. And I think first and foremost, a plan needs to be put out and communicated to people in town. Short-term plan, long-term plan, medium plan, but a plan as to how we're going to get where we want to go. Later on, I guess we'll be discussing the cost of running the transfer station, because it's in the tables that Cindy gave us. Yes, on the public works, $600,000 past fiscal year. $603,000. But anyway, I want to make sure that we've captured all your comments and questions. And thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
Any other comments, suggestions?
Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Next agenda item, memo from Blum, Shapiro regarding annual audit.
Something they're required to share with the board, and they've asked me to pass it along to you. Just in tandem to the correspondence, the management, not the management letter, the engagement letter you saw last month. This just talks about timelines and who's required to do what, and they're required to give it to you.
Thank you. Any board members have any questions on the correspondence from Blum, Shapiro? Todd?
Yes, I have comments and questions. Yeah, this letter is great. I really appreciate it. This is something that's done every year when they do an audit.
I think this is something new. Last month you saw the engagement letter. This is something new that they're sharing with their clients.
And that's great. It's good. Now, what I'm not clear in here, the post-audit meeting with management, does that include us?
Yes.
Okay, we're considered management. Oh, very good. Got a promotion. Okay, now, when is the audit completed? You've got commencement of field work, end of field work, issue of financial draft statements. When is the audit completed?
That depends on a variety of situations. The auditors arrived today. The audit can be held up by state reporting. Sometimes the state hasn't gotten reporting back on different retirement systems that our employees are in. and we wait for some actuarial reports which are in process. So sometimes we get held up by external sources other than ourselves. So as long as everybody gets their stuff in on time, the targeted date to issue the financial statements is the beginning of November.
Okay, so, issuance of financial statements, that's basically after the audit is completed, result of the audit, okay, got it. All right, thank you. I have one more question. Well, at least one more for now. Page 4, bottom page 4. Anonymous fraud tip hotline, do we have one in this town? They recommend it highly. Do we have one in this town?
I would say that's the police tip line. We don't have the resources to implement something like that, but they're just saying, I shouldn't say we don't have the resources, but I suppose we could implement something like that, but we do have the police tip line.
Okay, so if somebody has a concern about
On the webpage.
perceived audit, fraud or real fraud, they can call the police and
I would
report it.
assume they could start there. They could let the first selectman's office know.
Has anybody seen All the Queen's Horses on Netflix? Yeah. It's very interesting. It's about Dixon, Illinois, hometown of Ronald Reagan. About 16,000 population. Well, the comptroller there, over about 19 years, embezzled almost 54 million from the city. And it was discovered quite by accident by the city clerk who handled the treasury. It was quite shocking. It's a true story. It's a very interesting documentary. It's on Netflix. I suggest that we in the Board of Finance should watch it. It points out how things happen. Turns out, it's not that unusual.
No?
It happens a lot through all communities, big and small. And what I like about the hotline, I'm not interested in digging up dirt, but if there's dirt, there's dirt. But what I like about the hotline, people think they see something wrong, they got a place to call and get it straightened out rather than talk about it or whisper about it. And so if we have the police, then I'll tell people that if you have a concern, and nobody's told me anything, by the way, but if somebody comes up with some, I get a lot of comments, but if somebody comes up with something, I'll just tell them to call the police. Is that the town police or the state police?
Town police and the website have a hotline. I'm sure if they received a tip, they would pursue it.
Okay. But when you get a free moment, watch All the Queen's Horses. I think you find it interesting. Particularly, I think you find it interesting. But this letter's great. I like it very much. Very good. Thank you.
Any other comments, concerns, or questions regarding the annual audit memo? Okay. We'll move on to Chairman's report. Tax collector's report, I understand, was not ready.
It's not ready yet. We'll
time of
get it
meeting?
to you as soon as it is.
Okay.
Denise has submitted it to my office, but my office has been prepping for the auditors.
Fair enough. Subcommittee reports, communications report, Bruce and Todd. You have an
Yes,
update for us?
we're working on an article for the East Haddam News. It'll hopefully be in the first Thursday in September. It'll be about the importance of a fund balance, what the fund balance means. And we have a meeting a week from this Thursday, 23rd, I think, or Tuesday, 23rd of August. Yeah, it's a Thursday. And to review our draft. And it's already pretty interesting putting it together. The GASB publications are very, very helpful. And they too agree that fund balance is pretty darn important. Keep an eye on it. So that's our next article, importance of the fund balance. We have 3 more after that, as I mentioned way back in our last meeting in May. Or was it June? No, it was May. That's it. That's our report, unless Bruce has got something.
Nothing to add.
Thank you both. Increased revenue, Bill and Harvey. Harvey, do you have anything to add tonight?
The
tax collector has implemented some, if you were to request a copy of your tax bill after already having received a copy, she is now beginning to charge for those things. And my understanding is that it was a little surprising how many people made such requests.
And in addition, she can charge for people who are delinquent to rebill them.
Right.
And she's looking at $6,400 in revenues for the rebill for the past due for this year.
There are a couple other things that we have talked about, but they're still kind of in the works, with some expectation that they'll come to fruition.
Okay. Thank you, Harvey.
You're welcome.
Long-range planning, I don't know if Tracy and I have met. I'm not sure if Tracy wants to give an update or I will.
Go ahead.
We met on the 7th. Our next meeting is scheduled for the 30th. We do have a plan of reaching out to survey the boards and departments and commissions as to what their current capital plans are, what their department will look like in over the next decade, as far as staffing, equipment, projects, and facilities, but not limited to those topics. So we're drafting a request to them. And we've also got to deal with the 10-year plan of conservation. Also, the ad hoc committee that I'm on with the Board of Education space planning project that's been going on for quite a while. There was a meeting July 17th that I attended where the architects presented drawings to consolidate the elementary school and the middle school into one school. Part of the normal 10-year review of what they've been doing. And that board does not have an official recommendation to move on yet, but at least they have the information necessary from the architect and what it would entail for the middle school property anyway. So I'm expecting an update from that committee sometime soon as well. But that was just presented. We have financial policies was our fourth subcommittee. Again, Bill and Harvey.
We're making, in my estimation, good progress developing a draft for the board's approval for the policies with respect to debt. The thing, in my personal estimation, that seems to have been the biggest step forward for the town of East Haddam to consider are to have a range of, a target range for certain ratios, debt to revenues, and so on, so that you have, and going forward into the future, you have kind of an idea of what's sustainable, what's comfortable. So in the future, the people, our grandchildren, can have some idea of at least what we thought were ratios that are sustainable, and also that the rating agencies and so on look at and take into consideration. So I think we're making, it's very pleasing progress from my little perspective.
Thank you, Harvey. Okay. Next agenda item is first Selectman's report.
I'll try to keep it brief so we can get out of here. Testing for the land down at the bridge town land is starting to wrap up. We've seen some preliminary results, not all of them. And in terms of the environmental side of it, which is what's the big concern right now, it's looking a little better, I think, than we had anticipated at one time.
Great.
I'm somewhat optimistic, hesitant because I haven't seen everything yet. But what I have seen looks a little better, well, actually quite a bit better than I had expected.
Very
So
good.
I'm pleased with that. Bone Mill Road, which has been a thorn in everybody's side for the longest time, particularly the fire department, they're actually underway. They've started work today on that.
Great.
So the bridge has been fabricated. Once they get the preparation on site, it should just drop into place, be real quick. That was held up for a long time. The bollard lighting for the walking path up at the Heritage Park is all in now and operational. That got delayed with all the hassles we had from last spring, but it is in there, and I think, other than tonight, when it's a little damp to be out there walking, you always see people out there at night, and this is gonna be a real help for them. Comments on the tree removal. I've been working with Beth, with Steve, trying to figure out just how we're gonna deal with it. And at the last Selectmen's meeting, we authorized Beth to go ahead and get a list, as we do for snow plowing, of secondary vendors who come in and help us when we need help. Typically with quotes, and hopefully they're within bounds, and we'll get the best opportunities there, the best advantage out of it. We're also looking at how we're gonna deal with it in-house. It's gonna be a major problem. Steve's the opinion, we're looking at 10 years. The $4 million figure, I think, is a little off the charts. $1 million is not. And that's something that we're just gonna have to deal with. They've come up with a kind of a unique problem. The oaks that are dying, typically, you could count on them standing for perhaps 5 years, maybe a little longer, quite a bit longer, because they're tough and the internals don't rot away as fast. For some reason, these trees are more fragile. And some speculation on the drought combined with the gypsy moss, and it's changed the chemistry of the tree. My own opinion, I think that the trees that died were those that were marginal to begin with. Had issues, perhaps root rot, perhaps some rot inside the trunk, and they couldn't stand up to the drought and the gypsy moss as well as the others. And that, therefore, the bulk of the trees you see that are dead now have some secondary problem that makes it more difficult to bring them down safely. We're working on that. The Petticoat Lane right now, we got Eversource to come in. What we've asked them to do, and any time a tree is too close to the wires, we're not permitted to deal with it because it's dangerous. And so what we said, look, they could take down maybe half a dozen trees in the 3 days they're willing to give us. We said, don't take them down, top them. We can take them down once they're down below the wires, and we can deal with it. And hopefully, she was looking at about 16 trees that she wanted to get down. They got 6 today in the rain. So the odds are we're gonna be able to get that stretch cleaned up, at least some of the worst out of there. But we're trying to be creative in what we do. And we're also talking about getting our own equipment. We may come to you looking for a couple more people on the staff at Public Works, and to get them, our own crew out there doing this. And that, I think, in the long run is gonna be very cost effective. The vendors we're using right now, the costs are going up like a skyrocket. And with every town in Connecticut looking for people to take trees down, it's only gonna get a lot worse. We would do it ourselves, and had anybody on, they'd help us out with snow plowing. We'd be using fewer vendors in the winter. It's gonna cut costs. So overall, we can cut costs by having perhaps a couple more guys on board and just dedicate what we can to the trees. It's a serious problem. And keep in mind that these trees represent a liability to the town. If one of them falls on somebody driving by, we're certainly going to get sued. So we have to do some risk management. We have to decide where we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, and we really do have to get ahead of them. The prediction right now is that every single ash tree will die. And it's the nature of this emerald beetle, and there's no way around it. And those ash trees, some of them are gargantuan. They're enormous. I had always thought of ash trees as little 6, 8, 10, maybe a foot at the most. You got these monsters. And if you drive out of here, just as you start, go past Wigwam Road, look on the right. I think it's the first tree in front of that house is this god-awful ash. Probably a $3,000 tree to bring down. That's what we're looking at. So we're trying to be creative, we're talking about it, and we're moving forward on this. It's a major, major issue for us. And one other item, I didn't just waste all the time I was away. I sat there and did a lot of thinking, and a lot of thinking about the transfer station. I'll be presenting the bulky waste options, and I went through it, thought about the actual mechanics of what we have to do. How do you actually accomplish those goals? Not just a, let's do it. What's it gonna cost us? Where do we have to put people? How do we have to rearrange our structure up there? I've come up with 4 different options here. They're not the end-all to end-all. Beth is looking at them. I've got the transfer station people looking at them. I'm gonna be presenting them to the other selectmen on Wednesday and say, would you please look at it? Think about what we're trying to accomplish. How do we do it? And here's a framework to work from. Some of it's pretty straightforward. Some of it is a little bit more complicated. It also includes a provision for the stickers. And the stickers are something we already have. It's been enforcement. That's been the problem. And you know what? If we issue them here, Deb does it, it's not gonna change anything if we don't enforce it. So the real issue is how do we enforce it and make it happen? That's considered in this document. So, and this is going to be my approach. I'm already working on other things like this, but it takes time and thought, and you've got to come up with a structure that works. That's what I intend to do. And I apologize for taking a little longer than I probably should have to get this together. I've had some issues.
No, appreciate the update, Emmett. Thank you.
There you go.
Thank you.
Todd?
No, go ahead, Todd.
I have some questions. The tree removal. Has somebody categorized the tree as firewood versus lumber? Because there's value in lumber.
We have, and I'm not going to go into it because I really haven't discussed it with a guy, but we may find that we have a real advantage for some of those trees.
Yes,
So we can take a much bigger advantage than just firewood or lumber. And let's leave it at that. That is something I've been talking about, and it's going to be very interesting if it develops. Lacking that, we're also considering up the public works. Heating is a big issue. Steve has approached me twice, and I've told him to move forward on it. He says, we get one of those wood-burning stoves, outdoor stoves. We said, we've got more wood than God, stacked out there behind you. Take a look at it. He said, right now we're buying gas to heat the public works. He says, why on earth don't we get one of those stoves and heat it with wood? One of these remote stoves. I think it's a great idea. I think it could be very cost effective to us. And when you consider that we're opening those doors and all the heat we've created dissipates very quickly, I'd rather renew it with wood than gas. So that's something we're looking at as well.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments, Todd?
Yeah, it's a shame to lose all those trees. And most of them are healthy. I lost a big white oak at my place. It must be 150 years old. It was a healthy tree. And then the last gypsy moth outbreak, 25 years ago, I lost a 250-year-old white oak, huge tree. The large trees seem to be susceptible to it, but the situation is actually worse than you think, because I see a lot of secondary dying in the woods right now. Trees that survived last year, their leaves are falling off this year. You can see them, the brown tops, and usually they're white oaks, and I've got at least a dozen in my place in the woods. And I see some on the road as well. So the situation is probably a little bit worse. And you're quite right about trees being a danger. Look what happened to an 11-year-old boy up in Hartford this week.
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, in Hartford, city of Hartford, if you identify a tree that's a problem, you've got to issue a notice. You're about to cut this tree down. It's got to be a 10-day waiting period. Well, 3 days after the 10-day waiting period started, a bunch of kids were playing basketball, and the tree fell down and hit the kid. He's He's got bruised, he's all right, frankly. He just got bruised, didn't get killed. But that's what happens.
I mean, this is what we're up against.
Yeah, that's what happens, and it's a big problem. And I gave you this idea, I suggested this idea at the last Board of Selectmen meeting or some time ago, that these guys are real busy right now because the weather's good, but when the weather gets a little rougher, they don't get so busy. People don't want to have trees cut down because the leaves are off and that's such a big problem, or they think. So in the wintertime, they have reduced rates for cutting trees down.
I hope you're right, but I don't think that's gonna be the case. This is too big a problem.
There's a lot of guys cutting trees, yes, I agree, but there's something to keep in mind, because there's a lot of guys cutting trees, and the more guys cutting trees, the better the price is gonna be, right? Even though there's more job, but I would think more people is good people. Have we talked about going up to New Hampshire and Maine and asking for those guys to come down here? Like the power company brings people from out of state to help out, these guys can help out too, they know how to cut trees. That give more competition.
No, we've not, as a town, explored that yet. I think we're still trying to figure out just what we've got for a problem, how quick it is. Ashes actually don't represent an immediate problem. And we'll have plenty of warning that they're gonna go before they die, and be able to pick and choose which ones we do as we move along. The fact is, we're gonna cut them all eventually, but not all of them tomorrow. And one of the things they've asked is that we not stampede into cutting them down, because there may be some out there that are resistant to this stuff.
Right.
And they really want to know where those trees are, and they'd be ashamed if we cut down the tree that could be the basis for a whole new crop.
No, that's right.
So and this is the biologists, they're coming at us saying, take it easy, don't panic. We've got a little bit of time, we don't have a lot, but we've got some time to really move into this carefully.
Harvey, did you have some questions?
Well, really only one. It seems to me, from what we've heard, that the selectmen and public works and outside folks are, with the help of outside folks, are in the process of developing a plan. Unfortunately, as it turns out, we're not all that far from having, you're not. You're even closer than we are to beginning to have to think about what are we going to budget for next year? And if if the plan, as I kind of understood it, is a more than 1 year plan, how's that going to spread out over time? So I guess I'm, in a long-winded way, asking, in the next month or two, are you going to be able to come up with some rough numbers?
I hope to.
Okay.
You know,
I mean, I know you're working on it, so.
looking at the idea of putting people on gives us, we're gonna spend the money either way, and if we're gonna be able to save money when it comes to snow plowing, which offsets some of it.
Yeah.
And what benefits are there, and how do we keep the, the costs in line? And what is the most effective way to do that? That's
Right.
really the question.
Yeah.
A lot of thinking and a lot of number crunching to
Right, but this is
get an answer.
a big enough, sort of unforeseen bump
Yeah.
that the sooner we get to figure out how to swallow the nut, the better.
Yeah, I have a stack of paper I gave to Bill DeCristofaro
Okay, enough.
already for him to review that kind of looks at what we know about the problem right now. And so
Okay.
I think that was a couple of weeks ago I gave him that.
No, okay, thank you. I
Okay.
just
Okay.
pushing the ball.
Thank you, Emmett. Next agenda item, Finance Director's Report, June year-end preliminary budget report.
Right, and I normally flash all over this unaudited and preliminary because this is unaudited and preliminary numbers. The auditors are in. Just to walk through the budget, page 1, general government, 170,000 under budget. the key item over budget is legal, which we've been keeping you informed on all season. Board of Finance, 93,000 left. Of that 93,000, 75 is contingency that went unspent. So that was a good piece.
Can we ask questions?
Sure.
The Board of Finance, I'm not familiar. What happened there? We had budgeted 134,000.
90,000 of it is for contingency, and sometimes you use it and sometimes you don't.
Oh.
So contained within the Board of Finance budget, and there's a policy for how much contingency, the threshold, or the ratio to budget that you should have. So the only amount you guys used of your contingency this year was 15 out of the 90. So that's why.
Okay. So it's no function the Board of Finance has, not some, we're not doing, it's not that we have to do something, it just says there for contingency, I see.
It's your, you could hold the contingency for the town
Okay,
within your budget.
okay. Okay, question I have, Central Services Town Office Building, and then we have the Municipal Office Complex. The Central Services Town Office Building, will that line go to zero?
No. No, if you look at your budget next year, it's greatly reduced, but it's going to be a budget line item as long as we have possession of that building for alarms and heat and things. I don't have next year's budget with me, but there is money budgeted in that. A lot of things shifted in the budget, but there will be a small budget.
It won't be 100,000, there'll be
No,
something a lot less. Okay. All right. All right, thank you.
Okay, coming down to public safety, police are 33,000 over budget, but when we get over to revenues, you'll see that that's not the case. They have been doing a lot of special duty. One thing that I had brought to the attention of the Financial Policies Committee, we may look to establish a special revenue fund. Of course, the board would vote on it, but a special revenue fund for the police so that revenues coming in for special duty and expenditures going out for special duty are contained within the same fund. Because this, we've done that with other funds, so it makes it look like they're really over budget. But if you were to jump ahead to police special duty, they were 102,000 over budget in revenue. They brought in 102,000 more than we anticipated. So we made money on the deal, but it looks like it's not portrayed that way.
So how much money did the police make for us last year?
Its private duty was 102,000, or 78,000 over budget. We budgeted 24,000, they took in 102. That's on page 4, Todd.
Yeah, I saw it before. I was gonna ask the same question, but you beat me to it. So I'm just interested, there's other things. I'm a liaison for the police. You guys probably know that. So I was interested if there is extra money that they have made through their good work, can it be used it could be either saved, put back into the treasury for lower taxation, or it can be used by the police for other purposes.
The way that the things are set up now, it reverts back to the general fund, but additional discussion that we had at the finance subcommittee and ultimate to your group would be to establish this fund, and then at year end, potentially, whatever's left gets transferred in, and we establish a police reserve fund. So that's discussion we're having, and I'm working with Officer Rhodes. He and I are gonna draft a policy to start at the subcommittee and eventually come to the board. Because we think that's a good way to plan and put the expenses and the revenues in the same place.
I agree 100%. We can use it for a good purpose too.
And then the building department is well under budget because of part-time building official, and resident troopers is under budget because when we budgeted at 100%, not 85%. Back because we didn't know what the state was doing, planning the 17-18 budget. Public Works is over on some lines, but at the end of the day, as a department, they're 1,800 under budget. Health and Social Services,
Talk about that for a minute, excuse me. The snow removal, I thought that was gonna be blown, but it looks like you were 10 grand under.
no, it did well. By the time we released purchase orders that we thought we might expend, we surprisingly for last year did very well, but we budget on a 5-year average, and for the most part, that has served East Haddam positively.
That's good. Now, transfer station, we talked about it earlier tonight, but last year it was 582,000, now it's 600,000. I forgot, what's it gonna be for next year? What was it?
I didn't bring my budget book with
I
me,
didn't
but I
either.
can update you on that. And I believe that increase was maybe a repair or something, but I can get detail on that overage for you.
Okay, thank you.
Recreation, would go down to culture and recreation. Recreation Commission, over a little, we did have a long-time employee leave, and we had to pay out what their unearned, or earned rather, earned vacation time. And then town greens and fields is a little over budget in maintaining some equipment, making sure we've acquired additional equipment, and we're making sure it's maintained, and we already had discussion for next year's budget that we may have to tweak it a little, just to be sure that we keep all of our equipment serviced.
Excuse me, I have questions about town greens, grounds and fields.
Mm-hmm.
So that includes town recreational fields as well as board education fields?
No, it does not include Board of Education fields.
Okay, I was gonna say, it's an awful small number, wow.
That would be lovely, but no.
Okay,
And principal and interest, I have my amortization schedules. We have one loan that's always a few $100s more than I had budgeted for, but $400. Coming down, interfund transfers, all at 100%. So at the end of the day, we expended $236,998 less than it was budgeted. So we expended 99% of our $100,000, of 99% of our budget. And if you come to revenue, we received, our actual was at 101%. So in taxes, and I'm looking at my header when it says over is in brackets, but it's the opposite. Taxes, Denise, the tax collector collected $263,000 more than budgeted. State revenues, and I think given everything, if you all recall the budget season for 17-18, to come within $77,000 of state revenues is pretty good.
any stock tips for me?
Yeah. And it was largely attributed to circuit breaker being cut, so they had, hadn't done it. Investment income, this is solely, the increase is solely because we've had the arbitrage from the bond money sitting in the bank. And we're in keeping with with arbitrage laws, so we're not in trouble there.
Cindy, before you go off this page, I got a few questions. My memory needs to be refreshed. Airplane pilot, what on earth is that?
It's a payment we receive for airplane registrations.
Only $1,800, $2,000?
Yeah. Coming from the state, so
Oh, it comes from the state.
I believe it comes from the state, but it gets reflected under tax.
So this is based upon the number of aircraft that are kept down at East Haddam Airport? Wow. Okay. Chester Assessor Agreement, that's 12 grand under.
Correct.
What's going on there?
We are in negotiations with Chester. Our agreement with them, we're not necessarily in agreement with, they have been deducting us for every time the assessor is on vacation or sick or something. So that is not how the agreement worked for the first many, many years. And Emmett and their first selectmen are working on that, and we'll keep you posted.
Okay, thank you.
And then pilot, the state is the state, you come down, state. The rest is miscellaneous allotments, the 31,000 to the good. We budget usually around 25,000 a year in miscellaneous state revenues. The 56,000 is that steep grant. So that's why we're there to positive on that.
So we got that?
We
got that
did.
money? Mm-hmm. Wow.
They offered and we tried and we got it. We didn't turn them down.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay, now, yeah, circuit breaker, I think we're in the Didn't spend any money on circuit breaker, is that right?
We didn't receive any money.
From the state?
Circuit breaker in this year's budget, in the 18-19 budget, you've budgeted 0. The initial governor's proposal for 17-18 was to cut it in half, and they completely eliminated it. And it's not something, should the town choose to eliminate it, it's in state statute that you have to give it, but the state has taken away their, it's an unfunded mandate, if you will. They took away all their support for that.
Okay, so next year it's gonna be 0, or is already 0 for next year's budget?
For this year's budget, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
The next page, the key highlights here are land use permit fees were up. Building department permit fees, the Board of Selectmen will be acting on that, I think, this month. And based on what he has recommended and I have reviewed, if we were to apply those fees to last fiscal year, there would have been over 30,000 more in additional revenues. And it's in keeping with what other communities charge. Coming down, again, police, key piece of income. Transfer station did better. Town clerk did well in conveyance tax and town clerk fees. It was a pretty good year for local revenue as a whole. And then our other funding sources, the Purple and Palmer Fund work on there's an investment committee and there's an investment policy on what pays out, and they performed well, so we received additional from them. And Helon Cone did good as well. And then Ray School gave us more than we budgeted. And if you notice, we had done a reliance on fund balance for $100,000, but our revenues, we do not need to rely on fund balance to balance the 17-18 year. Our revenues were $250,000 more than we budgeted. And our revenues exceeded our expenditures by over $400,000. Which, if you told us a year ago that was going to happen, I don't think any of us would have thought that possible.
It's a great report. Preliminary, we understand, but thank you.
Hopefully the auditors don't tweak it too much. And then page 5 is just an update of legal as to what legal firms we've paid and their purpose. The largest piece is labor, as you can see.
Yeah, labor for what, though?
It's for an assortment of items. We did have 3 union contracts negotiated in this time frame, or I should say, 1 is settled, but 3 were negotiated in other employee matters that we can't really go into.
This is all by one attorney,
Yes.
most of it? Mm-hmm. I gotta ask, how do we choose that attorney?
This attorney has been with the town for quite some time. I can tell you, based on working with other firms, his rate is very competitive. Same with our town council. They're both very large, very good firms, and their rates are very competitive.
And under town council, 71712, I see 3 for lawyer, legal firms, but then Curtin Construction.
Curtin Construction was because we treated it as a legal matter and we can lien the property. If you recall, there was a fire earlier this year, and the insurance company would not act on things that were in public safety, so we went and took care of them. And in those instances, we will charge them till legal and then lien the property and recoup it at some point in time.
Oh. Okay. That's interesting.
Sometimes we're faced with, and you can look at Gold, Larson, and Bennett. They're completely for one legal item for Milan case, and we have spent a ton of money with regard to his properties over the years with sanitation issues and fires. Sometimes the town has to act in the interest of public safety and bear the cost.
Interesting. Before I forget, the transfer station, the expenses were 603,000 last year, but the fees were 50,000, almost 51,000.
Correct.
So to get the net cost of operating a transfer station, is it fair to subtract the 51,000 from the 603,000? Is that a fair thing to do?
For quick math, it doesn't contain all the costs associated, but yeah.
And the fees, from the transfer station fees, so what was the nature of the fees?
Those are fees paid for disposal, fees that are collected.
Like me, when I go with my 2,000 pounds of wood and concrete, I pay X dollars per pound.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you.
And then you have the summary of capital. We received reimbursement from the state on our asbestos fuel oil tank removal. And in projects eligible for reimbursement at the elementary school, they're still holding some retainage, but we received $400,000 in June. And I'm just working with the state to ensure that we get our reimbursements. So those are the elementary school renovations and then some projects from a couple of years ago. And as you move forward, it does indicate what's left and where we are, whether it's in process or completed, or the funds were repurposed for the 18-19 budget, or funds are available to be repurposed.
I have a question about the major capital projects. I'm impressed with the amount of money that's remaining for the radio towers.
Because we haven't done
I
a
didn't
little
put,
bit of it yet.
but I have a purchase order that I don't process in there for $500,000. So it's committed.
Okay, so that project was a little bit behind schedule, right? 'Cause I remember it was gonna be fairly quick with.
I don't know if they ever thought it would be quick, but there's been some delays. Bruce might be able to, or Emmett.
Multiple issues there. Design issues.
It's difficult, to say the least.
Okay,
It's probably the toughest project I've ever seen anybody try to do.
the radio towers?
This is frequencies and where you put them and how you do them, it's complicated.
We had a tower that was going to go at the middle school, and we thought we had approval for. And the Board of Ed said we never approved that. So there was a lack of communication, you might say. So that got scrapped.
Got scrapped. They won't allow it at all?
They wanted it to be moved, several hundred feet away from the ball field, and it would have created all new engineering and start from scratch, and it was just cost prohibitive. So now they've gone to another design to try to work around that being gone, that being missing. So they're working on it. I think might come out
We have an
okay.
incredibly difficult town to set up a good radio system in, and we're late in the game, which means frequencies are, if not impossible, very close to it. And getting the right frequencies and the right layout is mind-boggling.
Interesting.
Also on the major capital projects, we have 19 million in bond anticipation notes, and they expire or come due on the 6th of September, and we're hoping to close on a USDA loan and then roll the difference between what we fund with USDA and in the remaining into another ban. We won't be doing the full 15 million with the USDA because we do have some outstanding items, and the USDA wants to close us. So whatever's remaining will just shift to the bond we issue for the other projects.
And when is the USDA going to do all this?
Well, we need to renew our bans on the 6th. If the USDA is not ready to close, we'll renew our bans, and when the USDA funds us, we'll put it into escrow and make a little interest.
Has the USDA funded us at all so far?
No, it's pay as we go. Then they refund at the end.
Okay. Do I read this correctly, that the municipal office complex has 1.1 million left
That was at the end of June. We've expended additional funds. And there were funds, and Ron, or Emmett, or Tracy, do you still go to those? No. They had a lot of items like the tennis court and contingency funds, and they were waiting to make sure that, they're ticking off, and then they would go to some alternates. So it's anticipated they'll come close to the 15 million or to it, but there were items they were holding off on. Because as in any project, you're like, okay, we get all this done and then we'll tackle this.
Okay, so, but the building committee has not been discharged.
No, they won't be discharged for a long time.
Yeah, that's, people tell me they've been discharged. I said, I can't believe that.
No. Because it has to,
This
and as
place-
a matter of fact, none of the building committees have been discharged, even the elementary school and stuff, because until we close the state grants, we don't discharge the committees.
Correct.
What's the USDA loan amount? Do you have that?
It's 14-something million. We're still,
Okay.
USDA is I don't want to, what's the good word? Challenging.
Yeah.
So the emails are flying, and we're all looking at schedules and just to see what it'll be 14-something million is anticipated. But we're at the end of their fiscal year. They want us done. They're like, wherever you're at, we're done.
They're in a hurry now.
Yeah, they're in a hurry now.
Good. Anything else, Cindy?
No, and I don't know if anyone has any specific capital questions, but next month you'll receive an update as to what rolled forward.
I apologize, folks, I beg your patience, but Cindy, under capital plan totals, public works, I'm also struck by the numbers there too, 3.1 million.
There's 3 bridges in there.
And those 3 bridges are the 2 on-
Johnsonville, Foxtown, and Bone Mill.
and that would suck up the 3 million.
Oh, and yeah. Very much so. And yes, because you got 966,000 left in Foxtown, 453,000 left in Bone Mill, and 1.3 million left in Johnsonville.
Okay, thank you.
They're just slow. They take forever.
Any other questions? If not, we'll move on to liaison reports. Anybody have any updates from any of their other committees?
No, I'm sorry.
I didn't have a chance to visit with my folks. Too busy this summer. But, I'll have a report next meeting.
Gave my update with the, during the long-range planning, so if nobody has anything else, we can move on to old business. Under old business, we had a plan of conservation and development delivered to us in quite a lengthy format for our review. I don't know where we have that on our next agenda item, but we are expected for some feedback, to give feedback.
I think Bill had wanted Harvey to jump in on that. Surprise, no.
I didn't have
I
time to
wasn't
absorb
quick
the
enough.
178
I didn't duck
myself yet.
quickly enough.
I believe it was 178 pages.
But the section we have to worry about is much shorter.
Good.
I would hope for our September meeting to have at least some preliminary suggestions,
Okay.
barring catastrophes, but I would, it's an aspiration, not a guarantee.
Noted.
And you all receive it in a Word document. So if you even put your thoughts or whatever and start shooting it towards me, I can build it in a
Yes.
catalog format for you all to look at.
Very good. We can move on to new business. We have a grant acceptance for 2017 fiscal year emergency management performance grant.
This is a grant that's built into your operating budget. We build in the revenue, and it covers for half the emergency management director and about a little more than half of the, let me just look, yeah, and a little more than half of the assistant emergency management director. There was no grant approval form because it's part of the budget process.
Gotcha. Can I get a motion to accept the grant?
Sure. I move to recommend to the Board of Selectmen the acceptance of the State of Connecticut Department of Emergency Services and Public Protection, Division of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, grant entitled FY 2014 Emergency Management Performance Grant in the amount of $5,000.
That should say 17, I copied. Sorry.
2017. Okay. Revenue budget, blah, 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 and expense budget, blah, 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 $4,000 and blah, 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 $1,000, and ask the Board of Selectmen to schedule a town meeting for approval.
I like that motion.
Blah, blah, blah.
Second.
Second by Bruce, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, our next piece of new business is another grant acceptance for the 2018 Historic Document Preservation Grant. Town clerk applies for this.
And you approved her application at the May meeting.
I move to accept a grant from the State of Connecticut State Library in the amount of $4,500 for historic document preservation. And that is the Historic Document Preservation Fund, account number 26041-43,000, and to request that the Board of Selectmen schedule a town meeting for approval.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Another opportunity for guest and audience comments.
Thank you, Andy, for your hard work and moving forward with that. And Godspeed to you and also we were talking about the financial policies thing, what you're working on is good and it's cool. And if our state and our federal government set together those ratios that you're talking about, that would be a wonderful thing as well.
Good luck.
Thank you. Deb?
I have an audience question.
Okay.
When you do your grant acceptances, if I could make a suggestion, when there's no matching funds attached, when you hear the proposal to accept a grant, if awarded, can you just check a box that says if awarded, it's done, and you don't have to come back forward through this process, which delays moving forward with it?
You and Deb and I have talked, I have a concern because you're accepting something you don't have. But Deb and I have talked about it, but you're accepting it and asking to schedule a town meeting for something you don't necessarily have.
Well, you're still gonna have the town meeting, but you wouldn't have to bring it forward to the Board of Finance to do it, because they would have given its approval that if awarded, then schedule a town meeting to accept it. And it would save, process time. And then you would just get an update that said, by the way, this grant was awarded and we're pursuing to collect it. It would just be more efficient. My thought, your thought.
Policy thing, or is that just kind of?
That's how we've always done it, you get approved. I mean, the board can certainly discuss it if you awarded it properly, but it's just
Right, yeah, just the chronological order of the way.
the
that it's
government
going.
stuff.
Yeah.
But it's certainly up to the board. And finance subcommittees discussed it as well, but kind of got waylaid with other things.
Thank you, Deb.
I just
Anybody else
have
have
a category under other, that's what I wanted to bring up.
Okay,
I have a question.
we'll move on to category other. Todd?
Thank you. Revenues, fees, animal control violations. Have you looked at that as well, and you're looking for additional revenue?
We've talked about it, we haven't.
Because I just want to emphasize, I'm a liaison to the animal control officer,
Mm-hmm.
and he very much encouraged that the town exercise the fees, because maybe for a first offender, we already, he told me, we already have these fees in place, we just don't collect them.
Yeah, fines, basically.
Fines, yeah, I should say fines, right, not fees, thank you. But for a first offender, maybe you don't wanna collect the fine, but the second and third you do, because the town has to spend a great deal of money taking care of a loose dog. If it's the same dog 2 or 3 times, it gets old fast.
Yeah,
So-
we have talked about it and haven't. We've talked about it, it
Because-
hasn't got beyond talk.
Because it's 2 things, one, it's additional revenue, but most importantly, the bad actors stop being bad actors, because now they have increased incentive. So it's the same, everybody's equal.
Yeah. No, I apologize, we've talked about it, but haven't gotten
I
the
understand.
ball moved down the road.
You got a lot of things on your plate, I understand, but I just wanted to remind you, that's,
No,
thank you.
thank you.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Can I ask a question, please, about the transfer station?
You may, Bruce?
I'm pretty certain that, I think it was, I asked the question when we talked about acquiring a truck for transporting bulky waste. If our road crew, Public Works Department was willing to run those trucks. And I'm quite certain Beth sat at the senior center and said they were. Did that change, or was she?
Bruce, we are under negotiation for union contracts. Really can't talk about that.
Well, someday we're gonna have to talk about this.
Someday we're going to talk about it,
And it
yes.
seems like we get muzzled here because of one thing or another. She did say that they were willing to drive those trucks.
They did say,
So I just
that
wanna
they
make
were
sure that
willing to do
I heard right, okay? Also, as far as the bulky waste scale, that was placed in a position to pretty much guide vehicles up to the back through that corridor. So it would be as simple as cutting off that bypass.
it was when everything was charged. Today, there's exempt stuff and there's stuff that isn't. And having all traffic go over the scale creates wear and tear and damage and traffic issues. So it gets a little more complicated than just simply funneling everyone over it. And that's
Need
some of
someone
what,
you'd need someone at the fork to say, that way, that way.
that's some of what I've got written up here. I'll be presenting it Wednesday.
Okay, now, you've got fellows that won't drive perhaps to Willimantic. Were you talking about bringing people in to cut trees that are gonna be town employees? Careful
A
on
lot
that
of
one.
irons in the fire.
Yeah,
Careful on that one.
I agree with Bruce. Be very careful. Tree work is dangerous inherently anyway.
It doesn't happen without training.
Yeah,
It has to be people who are properly trained.
you have to,
One other brief comment, and it's about this tree issue that you have. Before I lived on Long Island, I lived in New Jersey. My best friend's name was Tom Madigan. And he had 6 children. Betsy was on a swing on a dead tree. And the branch broke. Betsy's no longer with us.
yeah.
It's an important issue that you deal with most haste. Because the trees do come down at the worst possible time, and they can't kill us. Sorry.
Thank you.
Well, I'll make a comment on trees. Wood business has been for the past 20 years. He's done, he's a manager of forest lands all across the country. Right now, he's down south managing land in Florida, Georgia, and Texas. But he did a lot of managing logging of wood in the north with professional people, $1 million crews. They are never allowed to touch a chainsaw. The only individual that had a chainsaw was a supervisor, he kept it in his truck. He used these machines to cut trees, far safer than a chainsaw.
Certainly something to think about, because we're gonna have a lot of it to do.
And those are the kind of contractors you're gonna need, because they can cut trees pretty darn quickly.
This is not going into a timberland. This is doing what's on our right-of-way alongside the road with a whole bunch of different issues. But yes, that's certainly something that has to be looked at. They got wonderful devices for doing that today.
Can we rent beavers?
We'll drop
We got plenty of those in town.
Right.
Talk to your animal control officer.
You know, one of the interesting phenomena right now, up until a few years ago, any wood laying side of the road was grabbed. None of it's being touched anymore. I've talked to more people who have all the wood they could ever dream of having, and they don't want any more. That's one of the problems we've got at this moment.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
Second.
1 moment.
before we adjourn,
You can adjourn, but
Turn us off.